In 1984, Julian Lennon tried to use home videos in his music video. Yoko Ono's lawyers stopped it right away. That was just the start. For many years, she controlled everything connected to John Lennon's name. Julian fought back in court 2 times, spending years and millions of dollars. But one thing in 1998 broke his heart completely. He discovered Yoko had lost $20 million of the family money in bad business deals while refusing to share anything with him. Today, Julian tells us why he'll never forgive her and what John really said before he died. Julian Charles John Lennon was born at 6:50 in the morning on April 8, 1963, at Sefton General Hospital in Liverpool. He weighed just under 8 pounds. That same week, his father's band, the Beatles, hit #1 with Please, Please Me. John wasn't there. He was playing at a club in London when his wife Cynthia was having the baby. 3 weeks later, manager Brian Epstein became Julian's godfather. The newspapers showed up, and the baby was photographed like a Beatles toy. When John finally saw his son, he supposedly said, "Who's going to look after it? Not him, not my son, just it." Cynthia quietly wrote down John's job on the birth certificate as musician, not Beatle. It didn't help. Within months, fans found their home, and they had to put up gates. Julian was named after John's mother, Julia, who was hit by a car and killed when John was 17. His middle name, Charles, came from Cynthia's father. John wasn't happy about it. In a letter to his Aunt Mimi in 1964, he called it a compromise I didn't want to make. That letter sold for $28,000 in 2012. Years later, John admitted something worse. Julian had been made in a hotel room after too much whiskey. He wasn't planned. He wasn't wanted. Beatles press officer Tony Barrow once said, "John even thought about adoption." But Epstein helped with money to keep the family together. John later told a therapist that becoming a father at 22 had been his biggest mistake. When Julian was 6 months old, he was placed on a blanket during a Beatles photo shoot at Abbey Road. The band stood around him for a picture that ended up in magazines all over the world. John barely looked at the baby. One photo, never published, showed him holding Julian stiffly with an unhappy face. Cynthia was the one calming him between camera flashes. By his first birthday, Julian had appeared in 34 Tarifurn Portintorm Beatles-related magazines, all without permission. Cynthia tried to sue one of the magazines, but the court said no because kids had no rights to their own picture. At 18 months, Julian's first word wasn't Mama or Dada. It was Beatles. He heard the records playing non-stop. Sometimes he'd point at the TV and yell, "Da!" at strangers with guitars. Every evening around 6 years, he waited at the window, hoping John would come home. He rarely did. A neighbor later said that Julian would scream when a car pulled up, then cry when it wasn't his dad. By age 2, he could recognize John's voice on the radio better than in person. Cynthia wrote that it broke her heart. When she told John, his only response was, "He'll get over it." John drew pictures of Julian throughout 1965. He filled over 20 notebooks with little cartoons. Julian with guitars, Julian with a mop-top haircut, but he only spent 11 actual days with him that year. Cynthia's housekeeper wrote in her diary that John had started using drugs and was often distant even at dinner. One drawing showed Julian at age 21 holding a needle. Years later, a biographer called it a scary prediction. Cynthia found the drawings in 1967. John told her it was just dark humor. The notebook stayed hidden until 1996, when they showed up during a legal fight over the family money. In court records from 1970, John told Cynthia that Julian came too early for his rock and roll lifestyle. A psychologist said that John showed signs of selfish parenting, putting his art and identity before his child. Some insiders said John once thought about sending Julian to boarding school at age 2. Cynthia said she'd tell the newspapers, and the idea was dropped. During Beatles' meditation sessions in India, John told Paul that Julian was his punishment from the universe. Paul later confirmed it in an interview. Julian didn't hear about that until years later. It crushed him. In November 1966, John went to a small art gallery and met Yoko Ono. She had a blank canvas on display, and John paid 5 shillings to hammer a nail into it. That small act started something that tore the family apart. Within weeks, John was calling Yoko late at night, while Cynthia slept. By January 1967, he had visited Yoko's studio 14 times. Cynthia found love notes by spring. When she confronted him, he simply said, "I've found my soulmate." Julian was 4 when he joined the Beatles for filming the Magical Mystery Tour. He sat next to Ringo Starr, who gave him candy and let him play with drumsticks. John barely noticed him, stuck to the phone, talking to Yoko. Cynthia said he took 17 calls from Yoko during the 2-day shoot. During one of their arguments, John threw a camera at the window. It missed Julian's head by inches. A crew member remembered John telling Cynthia, "She understands me better than you ever will." Julian stayed close to Ringo the whole time. He later said, "Ringo was more of a father that week than John had ever been." In March 1967, Julian brought home a crayon painting from nursery school, stars around a girl named Lucy. When John asked what it was, Julian said, "It's Lucy in the sky with diamonds." That night, John wrote one of the Beatles' most famous songs. But when reporters asked about the title, John talked about the drug rumors instead. He denied his son's inspiration. Julian only found out the truth years later by reading a fan magazine. In an interview, John once said, "My son doesn't understand what I created from his childish drawing." The girl from the painting confirmed it decades later, but John never said she was right. John filed for divorce in November 1968. The legal papers blamed marriage breakdown, but it was really about Yoko. Cynthia's lawyers got her a $100,000 settlement and $2,400 a year in child support, a tiny piece of John's millions. During the 6-week process, Julian saw John only twice. The first time, John smashed a guitar during a fight over custody. The second time, they spent 30 supervised minutes together at Christmas. Yoko waited outside in the fancy car. John's lawyer said that he wanted very little contact with Julian. Cynthia told the court that John once said, "Julian reminds me of my failures." On Julian's 6th birthday, April 8, 1969, John was in Montreal with Yoko holding a bed-in for peace. Instead of showing up, he sent a telegram that read, "Happy birthday, Jules. Sorry, busy with peace. Love, Dad." It arrived after the party ended. Cynthia later said Julian cried for 3 days. John gave 134 interviews that week, but didn't call his son once. A secretary at Apple Corps later said that John had written a longer message, but Yoko convinced him to shorten it. The next 3 birthdays got telegrams too. No calls, no visits. During the divorce, multiple people heard John say that Julian was not really my real son, just biology. When Yoko became pregnant, John fully welcomed her daughter from a previous marriage. The worst came in 1980, just weeks before John's death in a Playboy interview. He said Julian was a Saturday night thing, and that Sean, his son with Yoko, was the real one, planned, wanted, loved from the beginning. Julian read that at age 17. It broke something in him. Yoko used that interview later to justify giving Sean a bigger share of the inheritance, $50 million compared to Julian's 20. John's brother-in-law confirmed he had heard the "not real son" phrase more than once, and even had it on tape. In the spring of 1981, Julian Lennon was just 18 when Atlantic Records offered him a deal. It all started with simple demos he'd made in Weybridge using a basic 4-track tape setup at home. Producer Tony Dimitriades heard something in those rough recordings. Soon, Julian found himself recording his first album, Vallata, at George Martin's AIR Studios in Montserrat. The sessions weren't cheap. They cost $400,000, and the production was big, with a 12-member gospel choir trying for that rich, full sound Phil Spector made famous. The song Vallata came from a quiet place, his mother Cynthia's countryside cottage, where Julian had gone after the murder of his father, John Lennon. The words spoke of that loneliness. During recording, producer Phil Ramone made him do 47 vocal takes of the title track. At one point, Julian broke down in tears, overwhelmed by memories of John's harsh criticism. Mixing the album took 8 months. Julian personally reviewed and approved 156 edits. Atlantic saw huge potential and spent $1.2 million on marketing, counting on the Lennon legacy. The album came out on October 17, 1984. It started at number 17 on the Billboard 200, selling 143,000 copies in its first week, a record for a British solo debut that year. By December, it had gone platinum in the U.S. with over 1 million copies sold and 2.4 million around the world. The single, Too Late for Goodbyes, climbed to number 5 on the Billboard Hot 100. Julian directed its music video himself, using childhood footage that Cynthia had given him, even though Yoko Ono tried to stop it with legal threats. MTV played the video 47 times that November. Critics said his voice was eerily similar to John's. Rolling Stone called it inheriting the DNA of genius. By the end of the year, Julian had earned $780,000 in royalties. Atlantic reported $3.8 million in total money from the project. In February 1985, he was nominated for Best New Artist at the Grammys, but lost to Sade. Backstage, things got heated. Madonna confronted him over a quote in Smash Hits, where Julian had called her song "Material Girl Vapid." She accused him of riding on his father's fame. He fired back, shouting until security had to step in. The fight made headlines for 3 days. Even though Veloute outsold Sadie's album in the U.S. by 340,000 copies, Julian's loss sparked talk of an industry backlash against the Lennon name. Julian launched his North American tour in April 1985, starting in Boston. Tickets sold fast. The Roxy Theater sold out in just 18 minutes. Over the next couple of months, he performed 38 shows across 32 cities, bringing in $2.1 million in ticket sales. But in Detroit on May 28th, he lost his voice. Doctors diagnosed acute laryngitis. 11 shows were canceled, including one at Madison Square Garden, costing $670,000 in refunds. His tour manager later admitted Julian was smoking 2 packs a day and drinking whiskey before shows. He was struggling to sing like his father night after night. In his private tour diaries, he wrote that he felt like he was chasing a ghost. The vocal issues were like John's own battles with vocal cord problems in the 1970s. That summer, Julian released Say You're Wrong, which peaked at number 21. Its music video featured Elle Macpherson and was shot over 3 days in Malibu with a $120,000 budget. The British tabloids grabbed onto rumors of a romance between them. For over 2 weeks, headlines guessed about their relationship, despite both denying anything personal. Sales of the single dropped 35% week to week. Atlantic blamed the media circus. Despite it all, Julian earned $2.3 million that year and donated half, $1.15 million, to cystic fibrosis research in memory of a childhood friend. It barely made the news. In August 1985, during mixing sessions, engineer Phil Harding discovered a tape marked for Julian. 1979. It had 4 unreleased demos from John Lennon, including a version of Beautiful Boy, with different lyrics about their difficult relationship. Julian claimed them immediately, but within 3 days, Yoko Ono's lawyers blocked access, saying property laws from John's Dakota apartment. A legal fight started, costing $250,000 in fees before being settled quietly. In a letter later leaked to The Guardian, Julian accused Yoko of erasing his heritage. She never responded publicly, and the demos remain locked away. In early 1986, Julian released his second album, The Secret Value of Daydreaming, which earned gold status in the U.S. The single, Stick Around, reached number 32 on Billboard. Producer Neil Dorfsman gave the album a slick synth sound. Though the songwriting showed growth, it didn't reach the commercial heights of Veloute. Julian toured Europe in 1986, but the pressure grew. Fans kept shouting Beatles song titles. He was trying to create his own identity, but reviewers focused on his last name, not his music. This time marked a change. Julian began speaking openly in interviews about the weight of being a Lennon. That same year, he joined Mike Batt's musical version of Lewis Carroll's The Hunting of the Snark, playing the baker. It was a quirky, ambitious project with theatrical style, and it earned silver certification in the UK. Julian's role allowed him to stretch creatively beyond his usual pop-rock sound. By 1987, Julian had built significant wealth, but the media stayed focused on his personal life, not his songs. Tabloids connected his music to rumored romances, adding to his frustration. The industry pressure and constant comparisons led to burnout. He started pulling back from public life. In 1989, his album Mr. Jordan struggled. In the US, it peaked at number 87. It did better in Australia, reaching number 18. The single Now You're in Heaven went gold there. Eric Clapton contributed to some tracks. Though critics praised Julian's maturing voice, they said the album felt overly polished. It cost over $800,000 to produce, but U.S. sales only made back a quarter of that. On March 15, 1990, Julian crashed his Ferrari on the Pacific Coast Highway. He hit a concrete barrier at 70 miles per hour. The accident left him with a broken arm, cracked ribs, and whiplash. He had to cancel a 22-city tour, losing around $500,000. During recovery, he wrote, "You're the One," inspired by news of his mother Cynthia's cancer scare. The single only charted in Australia, peaking at 68. A lawsuit followed, settling for $75,000. Julian later admitted he'd been driving recklessly during a sad time. His comeback began in 1991. Virgin Records signed him with a $1.2 million advance. He released Help Yourself, featuring Saltwater, an environmental song that topped charts in Australia and reached number 6 in the UK. The haunting video included real footage of dying dolphins. Virgin donated $100,000 of its earnings to the World Wildlife Fund. Julian even performed the song at the Earth Summit in Rio. It became his biggest hit since Too Late for Goodbyes. But backlash followed. In 1992, his U.S. tour got protests from Beatles fans who accused him of using his father's name. At a Chicago concert, protesters disrupted the show, yelling fraud. Julian stopped mid-set and gave a 10-minute speech dedicating Rebel King to his absent father. MTV captured the moment, and it went viral before viral was a thing. Album sales jumped 40% afterward, but the tour still lost $300,000 due to cancellations over safety fears. Around the same time, Julian fell into a bitter fight with Virgin over his experimental album, Photograph Smile. The label rejected his jazz-influenced direction, pushing for more mainstream pop. The delays went on and on. During this time, Julian's drinking got worse. He later admitted he was drinking a bottle of vodka a day. In June 1994, he was arrested for DUI in Monaco after crashing his Porsche into a yacht club fence. Blood alcohol was 0.10%. He went to rehab in Switzerland for 8 weeks. He got sober, but drifted professionally. The album didn't come out until 1998. In 1991, he had sued Yoko Ono for $10 million. John's will had left Julian only a $250,000 trust. Sean Lennon, his half-brother, inherited money worth hundreds of millions. Julian got nothing from Hey Jude or from John's solo work, even ones that used Julian's childhood voice. After 18 months of legal fighting, they settled out of court for an estimated $20 million and some of John's personal things like his guitar and original Hey Jude lyrics. In 1995, Julian was nominated for an Oscar for Cole's Song, which he wrote for Mr. Holland's Opus. It was his biggest critical moment in years. The film's theme hit close to home. Julian had left music school in 1982 to tour with his band. During the Oscars, he sat next to Cynthia. They talked about how John had once left art school, too. 3 years later, on July 12, 1998, Julian found a dead albatross tangled in plastic on an Australian beach. It haunted him. He created the White Feather Foundation, named after a story John had once told him that if he ever died, he'd send a white feather as a sign. The foundation's first act was planting 10,000 trees. The money came from his song, I Don't Want to Know. Later that year, his second lawsuit against Yoko revealed even more. Court documents showed she had lost $20 million in dairy farm investments. Julian said John had promised equal inheritance during a 1979 visit to Bermuda. This legal fight went on for 3 years, costing him $800,000. They eventually settled in 1998 for $5 million, a small fraction of the estate. Money experts showed how Yoko sold John's original real estate for risky deals. Julian's team even had tapes of John expressing guilt over neglecting his first son. The photograph smile sessions were filled with therapy, medication, and sadness. One song, Day After Day, was written on the anniversary of John's death. It referenced the time of the shooting, 10:50 p.m. Despite hiring a top producer and recording at Abbey Road, the album flopped. It sold only 18,000 copies. The label dropped him. In a strange move, Julian tried to work with a rapper named Bald in 1998 on a track called All Alone. It bombed, selling only 2,400 copies. Around that time, a blind date with Naomi Campbell ended badly. She reportedly told him, "You're not John Lennon." The tabloids had a field day. Leaked emails from Yoko came out during the legal mess. She called Julian ungrateful. He responded by releasing old letters from John, full of regret. One even called Julian my biggest failure. A cassette of John telling Phil Spector that paying for Julian felt like a guilt tax also leaked. These personal wounds played out publicly. Julian's foundation donations increased after the stories went viral. But his relationships with Yoko and Sean never got better. They didn't speak for years. The letters and tapes sold at auction in 2003 for $48,000. After 1998, Julian Lennon took a quiet step away from the spotlight. Music had been his world for years, but he started feeling drawn to something else, something that didn't need crowds or loud stages. Photography slowly pulled him in. In 2007, when he joined his younger half-brother Sean on tour and brought along his camera, everything changed. He saw the world differently through the lens. And it wasn't the first time the world had opened up like that for him. Back in 1991, during his saltwater days, when the song had ruled the Australian charts for a month, Julian had been touring Down Under. That's when he met the Mirning people, an indigenous tribe with deep roots. In Adelaide, their elders gave him a white swan feather and asked him to help tell their story. For Julian, this was deeply personal. His father, John Lennon, had once told him that if Julian ever saw a white feather, it meant things would be okay. That moment in Australia felt like the sign. For the next 5 to 10 years, on and off, he spent time capturing indigenous lives and stories through his camera. By 2006, he'd co-produced and narrated a documentary called Whale Dreamers. The film followed the Mirning tribe and their spiritual bond with whales. It wasn't just about them, though. The project reached across borders, gathering 80 indigenous elders from all over the world to talk about how they'd been pushed aside, mistreated, killed, and stripped of their land. The editing wasn't easy. Julian was in Europe. The editor was in Byron Bay, Australia. The internet back then made working together painfully slow. Still, they pushed through. The film made it to a small screening at Cannes in 2007 and ended up winning 8 awards at different festivals. Julian didn't keep the profits. He sent them back to the communities whose stories had filled the screen. That was the beginning of something bigger. In 2007, he founded the White Feather Foundation, named after that moment in Adelaide. The mission was simple but wide: clean water, education, environmental help, and protection of indigenous culture. He went everywhere. With Scott Harrison from Charity Water, he visited Ethiopia and saw wells bringing fresh water to villages. With the UN's Millennium Villages project, he toured health clinics and schools in Kenya. In South America, he spent time with the Kogi people. Even Prince Albert II of Monaco noticed, awarding the foundation in 2008. After his mother, Cynthia, passed away in 2015, Julian created a scholarship in her name, helping more than 50 girls in Africa, the UK, and the US get an education. The foundation stays small by choice, focusing on projects others overlook. In 2009, Julian reconnected with someone from his past. Lucy Vauden had been a childhood friend. The same Lucy behind Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds. Now she was dying of lupus at age 46. Julian supported her during her final months, then released a song called Lucy in December of that year. Half the money went to lupus charities in the UK and US. He sang it live on CBS and revealed something touching. His original drawing of Lucy, thought lost for years, had been found in David Gilmour's collection. Gilmour let him use it as the song's artwork. The whole experience helped Julian finally let go of years of anger toward his father. It felt like a step toward peace. By that time, Julian had already stepped out of the music industry's rush. He moved to Europe in 1991, living in Italy and eventually settling in Monaco, where he became friends with Prince Albert. He never had children. In 2011, he said that his father's distant parenting had left him too unsure to be a dad himself. For years, Julian had called his father a hypocrite, someone who preached peace to the world, but never gave love to his own family. But after releasing Lucy, he said it helped him leave that pain behind, and for the first time truly accept his father and the Beatles. Throughout the 2000s, Julian kept taking photos. His first big exhibition opened in 2010 at the Morrison Hotel Gallery. It featured 35 shots, including personal moments with Sean and Bono. In 2012, his Alone series raised money for the foundation during Art Basel Miami. More collections followed. Horizon in New York in 2015, Cycle in LA in 2016. His photography became a visual diary of his foundation work, filled with powerful images of people and the planet. In 2021, he became the first fine arts photographer featured at the Aston Martin Residences Gallery in Miami. 2 years later, in 2023, his first coffee table book, Life's Fragile Moments, was published, bringing together over 20 years of his photography into one timeless collection. Despite once saying he was done with music, Julian surprised everyone in 2011 by releasing a new album. Everything Changes came out in October and was his first album since 1998's Photograph Smile. He had recorded nearly 30 songs in LA, working through personal pain. He called this his favorite album yet. It felt lighter, more honest. In 2013, he re-released it with bonus tracks, including Someday, a duet with Steven Tyler from Aerosmith. That song quoted lyrics from Baby You're a Rich Man and raised money for children's charities. Tyler and Lennon had written it together in just days. In 2016, Julian revisited his old hit, Saltwater, releasing a new version to mark 25 years of environmental activism. The remix had a hand-drawn animated video and the same message. The Earth needs us to care. The message hadn't changed, but the world had. The remix brought the song to streaming platforms and younger listeners. When the world shut down during the COVID-19 pandemic, Julian found himself reconnecting with music again. He and Justin Clayton dug through old demos. Some were surprisingly perfect. He also worked with guitarist Nuno Bettencourt to release a haunting cover of Radiohead's Karma Police in 2021. That same year at 57, Julian felt ready for more. What followed was his 7th studio album. On September 9, 2022, Jude was released, a direct nod to the Beatles' song Paul McCartney wrote for him when he was 5 and his father had just left. The new album came after Julian's old reel-to-reel tapes and cassettes were rediscovered in a basement. After converting the material to digital, he began writing again. The AI-powered video for Lucky Ones turned heads. The album touched deep emotional territory. Julian cried when he heard it finished. It felt like closure, but the past wasn't entirely at peace. The legal fight over John Lennon's estate had lasted 16 years. John had left everything to Yoko Ono. Julian got nothing. He fought in court and finally settled in 1996 for around $25 million, just a fraction of what he might have claimed. Worst of all, Yoko later auctioned off personal items John had kept, including letters Julian had written to his father. He had to buy them back with his own settlement money. In 2023, his photography reached a new high. Life's Fragile Moments got a major launch at Fotografiska in New York. The book held landscapes, portraits, even rare rehearsal shots of Sting and K.D. Lang. One of the most powerful photos showed Bono framed by a picture of John Lennon in the background. Julian's writing added depth to every photo. Then came something unexpected. Julian's Touch the Earth children's book series became an animated series called Love the Earth by 2025. It premiered at SXSW London with top-tier animation, sound design, and a cast that included Deepak Chopra, Sadie Frost, and King Charles himself, who appeared at the launch. The series offered mindful global stories for kids with endangered animals, indigenous voices, and environmental lessons. That same year, Julian had another exhibition in New York called Reminiscence. The photos were personal, urgent, and emotional, focusing again on the planet and how humans are tied to it. The show ran through March and April at Fahey Klein Gallery. And finally, in October 2025, Julian released a new EP titled Because. It featured 4 songs, all rescued from cassette demos from the late 80s and 90s. They were cleaned up, remixed, and brought to life with care. One track, A New Dream, got a fully hand-drawn music video that took weeks to finish. Julian may have started his career in the shadow of his father, but by now he had long stepped out of it, telling his own stories in his own words through every song, photograph, and gesture that carried more meaning than fame ever could.